Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back, guys. Today's video is going to be part two of crossbow limb failures. We're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, one of my personal favorite subjects, that is arrow weight. You guys may have watched a video that I did 2 years ago. If you have, thank you so much because this has been one of my most viewed, my most successful videos, and I have you guys to thank for that. But I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper into the arrow weight and how it translates into limb failures. And I wanted to put some numbers behind it. And guys, honestly, I thought about how I wanted to do this video. And truth be told, I've got to give credit where credit is due because this video and the content of it has really been done before. And that's by Rich over at Death by Bunjie. And he did a fantastic job with this video. He absolutely nailed it. The guests that he had on, the content that he showed, the numbers that he showed, and just the way he structured the video, it is really well done. So he did a whole series on limb issues and some different factors, kind of like what we're doing here. But in particular, his arrow weight video is fantastic. So you guys got to check it out. I put a link down below in the description. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely check it out. And so in this video, I want to kind of go over a little bit of what Rich talked about, some of my own numbers, and why I think the arrow weight discussion, and when we tie it to the numbers, you'll kind of see where I'm going with this, why it is still very important. Here are some numbers from my SWAT X1. So this was a stock KI hyper arrow, 400 grains or just shy of that on my scale. And here's another hyper arrow that I built up to 500 grains. And what you'll see here is if you look down at the kinetic energy, you're going to see I gained 5 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, which is about 3.8%. And in a nutshell, what Rich portrayed, which is 100% correct, is your whatever you gain in kinetic energy going into your arrow, that increase in energy going into your arrow, that is energy that is being removed from your bow, that your bow has to dissipate. So I put 5 foot-pounds of energy, more energy into my arrow. That means I removed 5 pounds of energy from my bow, my limbs, my string, the energy that the bow needs to dissipate. 3.8%, that might not seem like a lot. And it's going to vary between different bows, different arrow setups. But in a nutshell, and Rich talked about this too, if you want kind of a ballpark number of what you can reasonably expect and still get really good arrow performance and arrow flight and accuracy, all that stuff, is about 5%. And 5% does not seem like much at all, right? If you would have told me 5% of anything, I'd be like, why would I even bother? Should I really even worry about arrow weight if all I'm going to get is a 5% gain? The answer is yes. Yes, you should. And I'll start with Rich's because he's spot on when he says this, that excess energy reduction is every single time you pull the trigger. So however much you expect your bow in your limbs, whatever you expect that life to be, that energy reduction, that 5 foot-pounds or 3%, 5%, maybe it's 6%, that percentage, that is every single time you pull the trigger. And that can add up, especially when you talk about things like fasteners loosening or just how wound up, how much energy is stored in these bows. A 5% gain at face value might not seem like much, but over time that can really add up. And guys, minimum bolt weight, I've said this in a different video, is the red line of your crossbow. I still don't understand why, outside of just hitting the speed number that your manufacturer gave to you, why you'd want to shoot that. Like, we don't run our cars at red line. We don't push things to the absolute limit. So why do it on your crossbow, right? I'm sure there's some safety factors built in from the manufacturers, right? They might tell you a 400 grain arrow is your minimum arrow weight, and they've probably tested their bow to something lighter, but I have no idea what that safety factor is. I don't know how big or how small it is. And my assumption would be, just based on how fast these bows are now, how wound up they are, and how many issues crossbows have had in kind of today's technology, I would say that that margin for error is probably fairly small, especially when kind of speeds the game and speed sells. When you get less energy in your bow, you get less noise, less vibration, less noise. It's going to feel better to you. It's going to sound better to you. Less noise is obviously important when you're hunting, right? So less noise, that is another positive. More energy into your arrow means you have a more lethal arrow. You are going to be able to penetrate better. Doesn't matter what broadhead you have, okay? Take the broadhead out of it. Different broadheads penetrate better than others, but just in general, more kinetic energy, or what I think is more important to archery, is momentum. Increasing that momentum and getting more penetration, regardless of the broadhead, that is going to make your arrow setup more lethal. And a heavier arrow will lose less energy downrange than a lighter one. So think of it like I can throw a wiffle ball super fast. Like if I threw one through a chronograph, I could probably throw a wiffle ball faster through a chronograph at whatever zero distance, let's just call it that, than I could a baseball, right? But how much the energy losses are much faster, much greater with that wiffle ball than throwing a baseball, right? That wiffle ball dies off quicker than a baseball does. It's the same thing with your arrow. You're going to get increased accuracy when you go to a heavier arrow setup. One reason is less, deviation from the wind, or hitting, like a blade of grass or things like that, right? It's just going to be, it's a more stable setup, and it's going to be harder for it to uh, deviate from its trajectory, be deflected, things like that. And most of the time, when we talk about heavier arrows, we're talking about adding weight up front. And FOC is a very important thing. When you have higher FOC, your arrow is more, that weight up front is more pulling your arrow through the air versus the arrow kind of like pushing the front of it, pushing the point and insert. When you have more of that mass up front and you're pulling it, you're making your fletchings do less work. And it just, all of it translates into a better flying arrow, a more accurate arrow, one that is less susceptible to a trajectory change or a deviation due to factors that you can't control. Along those same lines, when your arrow gets to the target, with it being heavier, with it having more momentum, it's going to have a reduced chance of deflection or like a skip angle. So I kind of like, another analogy, like I like to use this when I tell people about this, is like bowling. So we used to go to this bowling alley that had speed, it would tell you how fast you were rolling the ball down a lane. And we used to always go grab like 6 and 8 pound bowling balls and just whip them as fast as we could down there to see who could get the fastest, speed as we're going down toward those pins. A lot of times we could get really fast speeds, especially being whatever college kids or young adults, whatever. But when you would hit the pins, a lot of times those balls would bounce and skip. You could have a perfect ball and you wouldn't get a strike because it would ping pong around so much. But if you threw a 16-pound ball down there, even though it's not going nearly as fast as what we could whip those little 6 and 8 pounders, it would drive right through all those pins. You would get a strike, right? Same thing with your arrow, especially if you have things like you hit heavy bone, or maybe your target jumps the string and it's actually moving while the arrow is starting its penetration. You're going to have a greater chance of maintaining your trajectory, that heavier arrow with that more momentum, more kinetic energy versus a lighter arrow. One thing that I don't think is talked about very much, but definitely matters, especially when we talk about once your arrow arrives at your target, is when you have a heavier arrow, it's likely that you're going to have better structural integrity. So a lot of times we either add point weight, right? So broadheads that are heavier, they've usually got more material to them, right? Or better grades of steel. So they're just going to be more robust, thicker blades versus lighter points. If you go with inserts, those inserts are, instead of aluminum and instead of being kind of small and not very far in the shaft, now you've got bigger inserts. You've got more, solid area up front in your arrow that can't bend, is harder to break. And a lot of times that's made out of steel instead of aluminum, right? So you've got, just overall, when you build an arrow to be heavier, it's likely that it's going to have higher structural integrity. If you just get a heavier shaft in general, it's also going to have higher structural integrity because the wall thickness of that shaft is probably thicker. That's how it's heavier, especially if it's the same arrow length. A 20-inch arrow that is whatever 8 grains per inch is not as structurally sound as an arrow that is 10.5 grains per inch. You've just got more material, so higher structural integrity. Honestly, you guys, there's probably more things than what I listed. Really, the only negative is a speed loss. And with how fast crossbows are today and the percentage, I've still got these KI SWAT numbers up here, the SWAT X1 numbers, that speed loss to me is not that big of a deal, especially when you look at, okay, a 9.5% speed loss. but a 14.5% gain in momentum and almost 4% reduction in energy that has to go through my bow. These are all wins. So, do I think heavy arrows are the cure for limb issues? At one point, I did. And in that original video, I did think that. I thought, just go to heavy arrows and you're not going to have limb issues. Now, especially when you look at the numbers, I don't think just heavy arrows are the cure to solve limb issues, but I do think they are extremely important and I do think they help. And I think heavy arrows, along with eliminating a lot of the user error elements that we discussed in our first video of this series, those two things combined will significantly reduce a lot of the limb issues that are out there today. So, in closing, take every gain that you can get in archery, take every inch that you can get when it comes to game, right? If you can make your arrow a little bit more accurate, penetrate a little bit better, every single one of those can matter. I have lost deer bow hunting, crossbow hunting, where I was like, man, if I could have just got into that chest cavity a little bit farther, I think I would have got that deer. If my shot would have just been a little bit higher, a little bit lower, a little bit left or right, it could have changed the whole game, right? It is a game of inches. You've got to take every inch you can get because things happen. Shots aren't perfect. Just crazy scenarios in the woods happen. You guys all know it. You've probably experienced it because I know I have. So I want every inch of accuracy that I can gain, but I think you've got to translate that same mentality into take every uh, benefit you can in regards to your equipment as well. Crossbows today are amazing feats of technology, if you want to put it that way. I mean, look at how far we've come. But these things are high strung. They've got a lot of stored energy. And if you can dissipate that even by 5%, just like if you can just gain that one extra inch of accuracy, same thing with your crossbow, that 5% less energy going through your limbs, less energy going through your bow, it could make the difference. And it's certainly not going to hurt anything. You've got a lot more gains than you have the single negative of some speed reduction. Okay. So that is kind of my 2023 take on bolt weight. Again, Rich, I want to give you a shout out. You did a fantastic video on this. This is kind of my 2 cents to go along with what Rich had done. So, you guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope that this makes sense to you. If it doesn't, shoot me a comment, shoot me an email, whatever. There are some other factors, though, that I think play into the limb issues that we are seeing with today's newer technology crossbows. And we're going to touch on that in the next video of this series. So be sure to stay tuned. But thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, whatever it is that you're watching this video. Just thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Remember, be a sportsman, make a sportsman.